Welcome back to our channel, dear listeners. Before we embark on tonight's journey into the Golden Age of ancient Rome, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. Your support helps us create these in-depth mythological stories that are perfect for relaxation and sleep. Tonight, we'll explore the legendary reign of Saturn, the god-king who ruled over Rome's most perfect era, a time when gold grew like grain, when peace reigned eternal, and when humanity lived in harmony with the divine. We'll discover how this golden age shaped Roman ideals, influenced their understanding of justice and prosperity, and continues to resonate through their greatest works of literature and philosophy. So settle in comfortably, dim the lights, and let me transport you to a time before time, when the hills of Rome knew only abundance and joy. The arrival of the exiled god. In the earliest days of the world, when the earth was young and the patterns of civilization had not yet been established, the 7 hills that would one day become Rome lay covered in pristine forests and meadows that had never known the touch of human hands. The land was wild but not hostile, fertile but untamed, waiting for the divine touch that would transform it into the foundation of the greatest empire the world would ever know. It was to this untouched realm that Saturn came, fleeing across the Mediterranean from the wrath of his son Jupiter, who had overthrown him in the cosmic revolution that established the current order of the gods. The old king of the golden race had been defeated not through any failing of wisdom or virtue, but through the inexorable turning of the cosmic wheel that decreed that each age must give way to the next. Each generation of divine rulers must yield to their successors. Saturn's journey to Italy was not a retreat but a pilgrimage, a conscious choice to seek out a land where he could establish something new rather than simply mourn what had been lost. The god had foreseen in his divine wisdom that the harsh Bronze Age now beginning under Jupiter's rule would eventually give way to something greater, and he understood that the seeds of that future greatness must be planted in fertile ground, tended by hands that remembered the golden perfection of the earliest days. When Saturn first set foot upon the soil that would become Latium, the very earth responded to his presence with an outpouring of abundance that had never been seen before or since. Trees that had grown slowly for centuries suddenly burst into bloom, their branches heavy with fruits of every variety. Springs that had run clear but sparse began flowing with water so pure and nourishing that a single drink could sustain a traveler for days. The air itself seemed to shimmer with golden light that made everything it touched more beautiful, more perfect, more alive. The indigenous peoples of the region, the ancient tribes who had lived as hunters and gatherers in the vast forests, emerged from their simple dwellings to witness the transformation of their world. They found themselves in the presence of a figure whose very appearance spoke of divine majesty tempered with paternal kindness. Saturn stood before them not as a conqueror but as a teacher, not as a ruler demanding submission but as a wise father offering guidance to beloved children. The god's physical form reflected the perfect balance of strength and gentleness that would characterize his reign. His hair and beard flowed like liquid silver, catching and reflecting the golden light that surrounded him until he seemed to be crowned with starlight itself. His robes, woven from materials that existed only in the divine realm, shifted between deep purple and midnight blue, decorated with patterns that seemed to show the movement of celestial bodies across the heavens. In his hands, Saturn carried the symbols of his divine authority, a scythe that could harvest not just grain but the very essence of time itself, and a sickle that represented his power over the cycles of growth and renewal that governed all life. These were not weapons of war but tools of cultivation, instruments that spoke of his role as the divine farmer who would teach humanity to work in harmony with the natural world rather than struggling against it. The first words that Saturn spoke to the assembled tribes became the foundation of Roman law and custom for all the ages that followed. He announced that he came not to rule over them as subjects but to dwell among them as a neighbor, that his divine powers would be used not for personal glory but for the benefit of all who chose to accept his guidance. Most importantly, he proclaimed that the land itself would be held in common, that none would possess more than they needed while others lacked the basics of life. This radical concept of shared abundance was not imposed through force or decree, but demonstrated through the miraculous transformation that Saturn's presence brought to the entire region. Under his influence, the soil became so fertile that crops planted in the morning could be harvested by evening, while fruit trees produced not just once per season but continuously throughout the year. The very stones of the earth seemed to transform into precious metals, providing all the gold and silver needed for trade and ornament without the need for dangerous mining operations. The effect of Saturn's arrival extended beyond mere material abundance to encompass a fundamental transformation in the nature of existence itself. The harsh struggle for survival that had characterized human life since the fall from the first Golden Age simply disappeared, replaced by a rhythm of life that flowed as naturally as the seasons themselves. Work became not the curse of necessity but the joy of creative expression, as humans discovered that labor performed in harmony with divine wisdom produced results far beyond what effort alone could achieve. Climate itself seemed to respond to Saturn's benevolent influence, becoming mild and temperate throughout the year. The violent storms that had previously ravaged the region simply ceased to occur, while droughts and floods became things of memory rather than ongoing threats. The seasons still turned in their appointed order, but each brought its own perfect weather and its own unique gifts, creating a cycle of abundance that never faltered or failed. Animals that had previously fled from human contact began to approach the settlements that grew up around Saturn's dwelling place, not as predators or prey but as companions and partners in the work of cultivation. Wild beasts lost their ferocity, becoming gentle and helpful, while domestic animals increased in both number and usefulness. The very concept of hunting for survival became obsolete as nature provided everything needed for sustenance without requiring the taking of life. The establishment of perfect society. Under Saturn's gentle guidance, the scattered tribes of ancient Latium came together to form the first truly civilized society, one based not on conquest and domination but on mutual cooperation and shared abundance. This was not the result of political negotiation or military alliance but the natural flowering of human nature when freed from the constraints of scarcity and fear that had previously shaped all social arrangements. The communities that developed during Saturn's reign were unlike anything that had existed before or would exist again until the end of time. There were no kings or rulers in the conventional sense, for Saturn himself served not as a monarch but as a wise counselor whose advice was sought and freely followed because of its obvious wisdom and beneficial results. Decision-making was accomplished through assemblies where every voice was heard and every perspective considered, with consensus emerging naturally as the truth became clear to all. The tables themselves were crafted from wood taken from trees that grew on legendary battlefields, each plank bearing the invisible marks of the heroic deeds performed in its vicinity. The benches were carved from stone quarried from the mountains of Jotunheim, materials that had witnessed the conflicts between gods and giants since the beginning of time. Sitting at these tables therefore connected each warrior to the long history of conflict between order and chaos that gave meaning to their eternal mission. The architecture of these early settlements reflected the harmony and balance that characterized every aspect of life during the Golden Age. Buildings were constructed not for defense or display of wealth, but for beauty and functionality, designed to enhance the natural landscape rather than dominating it. Homes were spacious and comfortable without being ostentatious, providing everything needed for a fulfilled life without encouraging the accumulation of unnecessary luxuries. The building materials themselves seemed to respond to the benevolent influence of Saturn's presence, taking on properties that made construction both easier and more beautiful than had ever been possible before. Stone cut from Golden Age quarries possessed strength that surpassed the finest marble while remaining light enough to be easily worked by human hands. Wood harvested from trees that had grown under divine blessing retained its living properties even after construction, continuing to grow and adapt to the changing needs of its inhabitants. The most remarkable feature of these communities was the complete absence of poverty, crime, or social discord. With abundance freely available to all, there was no motivation for theft or hoarding. With disputes resolved through patient discussion guided by Saturn's wisdom, there was no need for courts or punishments. With every person's needs met and talents appreciated, there was no basis for envy or resentment between individuals or groups. The integration of new arrivals into the established community of Saturn's realm followed traditions that evolved naturally from the principles of Golden Age society. Newcomers were welcomed not as strangers or potential threats, but as long-lost family members returning home after extended journeys. Veterans of the Golden Age community understood that every person possessed unique gifts and perspectives that would enrich the collective wisdom and capability of the whole. Education during this golden period was not a formal system of schools and teachers, but a natural process of learning through observation and participation in the life of the community. Children learned by watching the adults around them, absorbing not just practical skills, but also the values and attitudes that made peaceful cooperation possible. Saturn himself served as the ultimate teacher, sharing his divine knowledge freely with all who sought it. The curriculum of this informal education system encompassed every aspect of human knowledge and skill. Agriculture was taught not as a struggle against hostile nature, but as a collaborative dance with the living earth. Craftsmanship was learned not as mere technique, but as a form of artistic expression that brought beauty into everyday life. Music and poetry flourished as natural forms of communication that conveyed meaning and emotion more perfectly than ordinary speech. Most importantly, the people of Saturn's realm learned to understand their place in the cosmic order, to see themselves not as isolated individuals struggling for survival, but as part of a vast web of relationships that connected all living things with the divine source of existence. This perspective eliminated the alienation and existential anxiety that would plague later ages, replacing them with a deep sense of belonging and purpose. The economy of the Golden Age operated on principles that seemed magical to later generations, but were simply the natural result of abundance combined with wisdom. There was no money in the conventional sense, for trade was conducted through direct exchange of goods and services motivated by genuine need rather than profit. Work was distributed according to ability and inclination rather than necessity, ensuring that every task was performed by those best suited to it and most willing to undertake it. Innovation and creativity flourished under these conditions as never before or since. Freed from the pressure to compete for limited resources, Human ingenuity turned toward solving problems and creating beauty rather than gaining advantage over others. The crafts and arts that developed during this period achieved levels of perfection that later ages would struggle to match, not through superior tools or techniques, but through the unlimited time and care that could be devoted to each creation. The legal system of Saturn's realm was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of its social organization, for it managed to maintain perfect order without any formal laws or enforcement mechanisms. Disputes were rare because the conditions that normally create conflict simply did not exist, and when disagreements did arise, they were resolved through patient discussion that sought truth rather than victory for any particular party. Saturn's own role in this legal process was that of a mediator and counselor rather than a judge or lawgiver. He would listen to all sides of any dispute with infinite patience, asking questions that helped the participants understand the deeper issues at stake and guiding them toward solutions that addressed everyone's legitimate needs. His decisions were accepted not because of his authority, but because of their obvious wisdom and fairness. The result was a system of justice that was both perfectly effective and completely voluntary, based on the understanding that true law comes not from external compulsion but from internal recognition of what is right and good. This principle would later become one of the foundational concepts of Roman jurisprudence, though it would never again be implemented as perfectly as it was during Saturn's Golden Age. Religious practice during this period was similarly integrated into the fabric of daily life rather than being segregated into formal rituals and ceremonies. Every act of cultivation, creation, and cooperation was understood as a form of worship, a way of participating in the divine order that Saturn represented. Temples existed not as places of supplication, but as centers of learning and community gathering, where the wisdom of the gods was shared freely with all who sought it. The divine wisdom of the Golden Law. The legal and governmental principles that emerged during Saturn's reign represented the highest achievement of human political wisdom, creating a system that managed to combine perfect freedom with perfect order in ways that later civilizations would struggle to understand or replicate. This was not the result of complex constitutional arrangements or elaborate checks and balances, but the natural expression of a society where divine wisdom guided human action at every level. The foundation of this golden law was the principle that all legitimate authority derives from wisdom rather than force, and that true wisdom manifests itself through its beneficial effects on those who are governed by it. Saturn's position as ruler was maintained not through military power or hereditary right, but through the daily demonstration that his guidance led to prosperity, peace, and happiness for all who followed it. This principle created a form of government that was simultaneously monarchical and democratic, for while Saturn possessed ultimate authority, that authority was exercised only through consultation with the community and only in ways that served the common good. Decisions were made through a process of collective deliberation where Saturn's role was to facilitate understanding rather than impose solutions, ensuring that the wisdom of the entire community was brought to bear on every important question. The legal codes that developed under this system were remarkable for their simplicity and universality. Rather than the complex network of specific rules and exceptions that characterized later legal systems, Saturn's law operated through a few fundamental principles that could be applied to any situation. The most important of these was the principle of universal care, that every action should be evaluated based on its effects on the welfare of all members of the community. This principle eliminated the need for detailed regulations about property rights, contracts, and criminal behavior because it provided a clear standard for evaluating any dispute or controversy. When conflicts arose, The question was not which party had the stronger legal claim, but which resolution would best serve the interests of all concerned, including the community as a whole and future generations who would be affected by the precedent being established. The enforcement of these laws required no police force or court system because the principles themselves were so obviously beneficial that compliance was voluntary and universal. When someone acted in ways that violated the common good, the natural consequences of their actions were sufficient punishment, while the community's response was focused on understanding why the violation had occurred and preventing similar problems in the future. This approach to justice emphasized healing and restoration rather than punishment and retribution, reflecting Saturn's understanding that wrongdoing usually arose from ignorance or desperation rather than malicious intent. By addressing the underlying causes of antisocial behavior rather than simply punishing its symptoms, the Golden Age legal system was able to maintain social harmony without creating the adversarial relationships that characterized later judicial processes. The economic principles that governed Saturn's realm were equally revolutionary, creating a system of production and distribution that maximized both efficiency and fairness without requiring the complex regulatory apparatus that later economies would develop. The key insight was that true wealth consists not in the accumulation of material possessions, but in the security and freedom that come from knowing that all genuine needs will be met. Under this understanding, the goal of economic activity was not profit maximization, but the creation of conditions where every member of the community could develop their talents and contribute their unique gifts to the common welfare. This required a fundamentally different approach to questions of ownership, labor, and exchange than would characterize later economic systems. Property during the Golden Age was understood to be fundamentally communal, with individual possession limited to personal items and the tools needed for one's chosen work. Land, in particular, was considered to belong to the community as a whole, with individuals and families granted use rights based on their ability to cultivate it productively and their commitment to sharing the results with those in need. This arrangement eliminated the conflicts over resource control that would plague later societies while ensuring that the Earth's bounty was used wisely and sustainably. Since no one could accumulate more land than they could personally cultivate, there was no basis for the concentration of agricultural wealth that would later lead to social inequality and political instability. Labor was organized according to the principle of voluntary association based on natural aptitude and personal inclination rather than economic necessity or social status. Individuals were free to choose their occupations based on their talents and interests, with the understanding that every honest work contributed to the common good and deserved equal respect and support from the community. This system ensured that all necessary tasks were performed by those best suited to them, while eliminating the alienation and resentment that arise when people are forced into occupations that conflict with their natural abilities or personal values. The result was not only greater efficiency and higher quality production, but also higher levels of personal satisfaction and social harmony. Exchange of goods and services was conducted through a system of reciprocal generosity rather than calculated equivalence, with individuals and communities giving freely of their surplus while trusting that their own needs would be met through the generosity of others. This required a level of social trust that seemed impossible to later generations, but was the natural result of the abundance and security that characterized life under Saturn's rule. The monetary systems that would later develop were unnecessary because the underlying scarcity that makes money valuable simply did not exist. When everyone has access to everything they need, and when production consistently exceeds consumption, the complex mechanisms of pricing and exchange become irrelevant, replaced by the simple sharing of abundance according to need and desire. the transformation of human nature. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Saturn's Golden Age was not the external abundance and harmony that characterized the society, but the profound transformation that occurred in human nature itself under the influence of divine wisdom and perfect social conditions. The people who lived during this blessed period developed qualities of character and capabilities of mind that would seem almost godlike to later generations struggling under the constraints of the Iron Age. The most fundamental change was the elimination of the fear and anxiety that had previously dominated human consciousness since the fall from the original Golden Race. When basic survival was guaranteed and social conflict eliminated, the human mind was freed to develop its higher potentials without the constant distraction of immediate threats and pressing needs. This liberation allowed for the emergence of intellectual and spiritual capacities that had remained dormant during the harsh ages of struggle. Memory, in particular, reached levels of development that later ages would find almost impossible to believe. The people of Saturn's time could retain with perfect clarity not just their own experiences but the accumulated wisdom of their communities, creating a living library of knowledge that grew constantly richer with each generation. This collective memory meant that valuable discoveries and insights were never lost, allowing for continuous progress in all areas of human endeavor. The enhanced memory was accompanied by greatly increased powers of perception and understanding. Individuals could see patterns and connections that remained invisible to later generations, allowing them to solve problems and create innovations with an ease that seemed magical. This was not the result of supernatural intervention but the natural flowering of human intelligence when freed from the limitations imposed by stress, competition, and ignorance. Communication during the Golden Age reached levels of clarity and depth that transcended anything achieved by later civilizations. People could convey not just information but emotions, intentions, and complex conceptual relationships with a precision that eliminated the misunderstandings and conflicts that would plague future societies. This perfect communication was based not on supernatural telepathy, but on the combination of enhanced perception, shared values, and the mutual trust that made complete honesty both possible and beneficial. The creative abilities that emerged under these conditions produced works of art, literature, and music that captured the essence of divine beauty in material form. These creations were not mere decorations or entertainments but functional elements of daily life that enhanced the spiritual and emotional well-being of all who encountered them. Every tool, building, and ornament became a work of art, while every song and story became a vehicle for wisdom and inspiration. Physical health during Saturn's reign was maintained at levels that later ages would consider miraculous, not through medical intervention but through the natural harmony between mind, body, and environment that characterized life in the Golden Age. Disease was virtually unknown, not because of magical protection but because the conditions that create illness, stress, malnutrition, pollution, and social discord simply did not exist. The human lifespan during this period was naturally extended far beyond what later generations would consider normal, with individuals routinely living for centuries while maintaining the vigor and clarity of youth. This longevity was not the result of external intervention but the natural consequence of living in harmony with the fundamental laws of existence, free from the factors that normally accelerate aging and decay. Perhaps most importantly, the moral and spiritual development of humanity reached unprecedented heights during Saturn's Golden Age. The artificial conflicts between self-interest and social responsibility that would characterize later ethical systems simply did not arise when individual fulfillment and community welfare were naturally aligned. People acted with spontaneous kindness and wisdom not because they were compelled to do so, but because such behavior was the natural expression of their enhanced understanding and the obvious path to personal happiness. This moral transformation was accompanied by a deepened spiritual awareness that connected each individual directly with the divine sources of existence. Religion was not a separate sphere of activity requiring special rituals and priestly intermediaries, but an integrated aspect of daily life where every action was understood as a form of worship and every relationship as a manifestation of divine love. The educational system that produced these remarkable human beings was based on the principle that learning is a natural process that occurs spontaneously when the right conditions are provided. Children were not forced to memorize information or perform tasks that conflicted with their developmental needs, but were instead encouraged to explore their environment and develop their talents at their own pace under the gentle guidance of wise teachers. The curriculum of this educational system was remarkably comprehensive, encompassing not just practical skills and factual knowledge, but also the development of character, aesthetic sensitivity, and spiritual insight. Students learned to see themselves as part of the larger web of relationships that connected all existence, developing the perspective and values that would allow them to contribute constructively to their communities throughout their extended lifespans. The festivals of eternal harvest. The celebration of abundance that characterized Saturn's Golden Age found its most perfect expression in the great festivals that marked the turning of the seasons and the continuous harvest that blessed the land. These gatherings were not mere holidays or temporary respites from labor, but integral aspects of the Golden Age way of life. Occasions when the entire community came together to express gratitude for their blessings and to reinforce the bonds of cooperation and mutual affection that made their society possible. The most magnificent of these celebrations was the Festival of the Eternal Harvest, held when the earth reached the peak of its miraculous productivity and the fruits of divine abundance overflowed from every field and orchard. This was not a single day or week of celebration, but an entire season of joy that encompassed music, dance, feasting, and the sharing of gifts on a scale that later generations would find almost impossible to imagine. Preparations for the festival began weeks in advance as communities throughout the region collaborated to create displays of abundance that showcased the miraculous productivity of their blessed land. Gardens that already bloomed with impossible beauty were enhanced with artistic arrangements that turned entire valleys into living works of art. Orchards heavy with fruit were decorated with garlands and banners that celebrated both the generosity of nature and the wisdom of the divine ruler who had made such bounty possible. The opening ceremonies of the festival were presided over by Saturn himself, who would appear at the center of the largest gathering in robes that seemed to be woven from golden sunlight itself. His presence transformed the entire assembly, filling every participant with a sense of perfect peace and contentment that made the celebration more than mere festivity. It became a direct experience of divine blessing and cosmic harmony. Saturn's speeches during these opening ceremonies were not formal pronouncements but intimate conversations with his beloved people, sharing insights about the nature of abundance and the responsibilities that came with living in paradise. He would speak of the gratitude owed to the earth for its generosity, the importance of sharing blessings with all who had need, and the eternal principles that governed the Golden Age way of life. These words were received not as commands from a distant ruler, but as wisdom shared by a loving father, guidance that helped the assembled people understand their place in the cosmic order and their role in maintaining the harmony that made their blessed existence possible. The effect was to transform individual celebration into collective worship, creating a shared experience of reverence and joy that strengthened the spiritual bonds of the community. The music that filled the festival grounds during these celebrations represented the highest achievement of human artistic expression, combining melodies of transcendent beauty with rhythms that seemed to echo the fundamental harmonies of creation itself. Every member of the community contributed to this musical offering according to their talents and inclinations, creating compositions of such complexity and beauty that they seemed to bridge the gap between earthly and divine expression. Instruments crafted from the miraculous materials available during the Golden Age produced sounds of purity and power that enhanced rather than competed with the human voice. Harps strung with threads spun from precious metals created ethereal harmonies, while drums made from the earth itself provided rhythmic foundations that connected the music to the very heartbeat of the living world. The dances that accompanied this music were not mere entertainment but ritual expressions of the cosmic principles that governed Golden Age society. Elaborate choreographies involving hundreds of participants represented the movements of celestial bodies, the cycles of growth and harvest, and the intricate relationships that bound all living things together in perfect harmony. The feasting that accompanied the festivals represented abundance on a scale that defied all later understanding of what was possible within the natural order. Tables that stretched for miles were laden with foods of every variety, prepared with care and artistry that made each dish a masterpiece of culinary creation. Yet this abundance was not the result of hoarding or excessive preparation, but the natural overflow of a land so productive that scarcity was literally inconceivable. The foods served at these feasts possessed qualities that transcended mere nutrition, providing not just physical sustenance but emotional and spiritual nourishment as well. Fruits that had ripened under the direct influence of divine blessing carried within them the essence of joy and contentment, while grains that had been cultivated through perfect harmony between human wisdom and natural abundance provided strength and vitality that lasted far beyond the immediate meal. The arts of paradise. The creative achievements that flourished during Saturn's Golden Age represented the pinnacle of human artistic expression, combining technical mastery with spiritual insight to produce works that served simultaneously as objects of beauty, tools of wisdom, and vehicles of divine inspiration. These arts were not the exclusive province of a specialized class of artists, but the natural expression of human creativity when freed from the constraints of scarcity and social conflict. Every aspect of daily life during the Golden Age was touched by artistic sensibility, from the design of the simplest tools to the planning of entire communities. This integration of aesthetic and functional considerations created an environment where beauty was not a luxury added to life, but an essential element that enhanced the spiritual and emotional well-being of all who encountered it. Architecture during this period achieved levels of harmony and proportion that later ages would struggle to understand or replicate. Buildings were designed not to display wealth or power, but to enhance the natural beauty of their settings while providing spaces that supported the activities for which they were intended. Homes were constructed with perfect attention to the needs of their inhabitants, while public buildings created gathering spaces that fostered community interaction and collective celebration. The materials used in Golden Age construction possessed properties that seemed magical to later generations, but were simply the natural result of divine abundance combined with perfect craftsmanship. Stones that had been touched by Saturn's presence became stronger and more beautiful, while also acquiring the ability to regulate temperature and humidity within the buildings they supported. Wood that had grown under the influence of Golden Age wisdom retained its living properties even after construction, continuing to grow and adapt to changing needs. The decorative elements incorporated into these buildings were not mere ornaments but functional components that enhanced both the beauty and the utility of the structures. Carvings and sculptures provided not just visual pleasure but also spiritual instruction, depicting scenes and symbols that reminded viewers of the principles that governed their blessed society. Paintings and mosaics created using pigments that never faded served as permanent records of important events and enduring sources of inspiration for future generations. Gardens and landscaping during the Golden Age blurred the distinction between natural and cultivated beauty, creating outdoor spaces that enhanced the Earth's native abundance while providing settings for community activities and individual contemplation. These gardens were designed not to control or dominate nature, but to collaborate with it, creating partnerships between human creativity and natural processes that produced results more beautiful than either could achieve alone. Sculpture during the Golden Age achieved levels of lifelike realism combined with spiritual expressiveness that made each work a unique window into the divine nature of existence. Statues were not mere representations of their subjects but concentrated expressions of their essential characters, created through techniques that captured not just physical appearance but also the inner qualities that defined each individual's contribution to the Golden Age community. Painting during this period transcended the limitations of conventional pigments and surfaces, creating works that seemed to glow with inner light and change their appearance based on the emotional and spiritual state of the observer. These paintings were not static representations but living works of art that continued to evolve and develop long after their initial creation, responding to the changing needs and understanding of the community they served. Music during the Golden Age reached levels of complexity and beauty that later civilizations would find almost impossible to believe, combining sophisticated compositional techniques with performance practices that enhanced the natural acoustical properties of voices and instruments. Composers working under the influence of divine inspiration created works that seemed to echo the fundamental harmonies of creation, while also expressing the unique cultural achievements of their blessed society. Literature and poetry during Saturn's reign achieved levels of eloquence and wisdom that captured the essence of Golden Age experience, while also preserving its lessons for future generations who would need guidance and inspiration during darker times. Writers working under the influence of perfect social conditions and divine wisdom created works that combined artistic beauty with practical instruction, producing literature that served simultaneously as entertainment, education, and spiritual guidance. The philosophy of abundance. The intellectual achievements of Saturn's Golden Age extended far beyond practical innovations and artistic creations to encompass profound philosophical insights that illuminated the fundamental nature of existence and humanity's place within the cosmic order. These philosophical developments were not abstract academic exercises but practical wisdom that emerged from direct experience of life lived in harmony with divine principles. The foundation of Golden Age philosophy was the understanding that abundance, rather than scarcity, was the natural state of the universe, and that the suffering and conflict that characterized later ages resulted not from inherent flaws in creation but from humanity's separation from the divine wisdom that governed cosmic harmony. This insight formed the basis for a comprehensive worldview that explained both the perfection of the present age and the inevitable decline that prophecy foretold would follow. The philosophers of Saturn's time understood that the universe operated according to principles of infinite generosity and creative abundance, with limitation and want arising only when intelligent beings attempted to hoard or control the natural flow of cosmic gifts. This understanding led to practical social arrangements that ensured perpetual prosperity, while also providing theoretical frameworks that would guide future generations attempting to restore Golden Age conditions. The concept of time itself was fundamentally reconceptualized during this period, moving away from the linear understanding that would characterize later ages toward a cyclical view that emphasized eternal return and the possibility of recovering lost perfection. Golden Age philosophers taught that time was not a river flowing toward an unknown destination, but a great wheel that turned through predictable cycles, bringing periods of decline and renewal in accordance with cosmic law. This temporal philosophy had profound implications for how individuals understood their personal lives and social responsibilities. Rather than seeing themselves as isolated beings struggling through a brief existence toward an uncertain fate, people of the Golden Age understood themselves as eternal souls participating in cosmic cycles that gave meaning and the ethical systems that developed during Saturn's reign were based on the principle that moral behavior was not a matter of following external rules or seeking rewards and punishments, but of aligning individual will with the cosmic harmony that naturally promoted the welfare of all beings. This alignment was not difficult or painful, but the most natural and satisfying way to live, producing happiness and fulfillment that far exceeded anything achievable through selfish pursuit. The Golden Age understanding of virtue emphasized the integration of wisdom, beauty, and goodness rather than the conflicts between these values that would plague later moral philosophies. Actions that were truly wise were also inherently beautiful and good, while behavior that violated cosmic harmony was simultaneously foolish, ugly, and harmful. This integration eliminated the moral confusion and ethical relativism that would characterize less enlightened periods. Perhaps most importantly, Golden Age philosophy developed a comprehensive understanding of human nature that revealed the unlimited potential for development and achievement that existed within every individual when proper conditions were provided. This anthropological insight would later inspire the Roman concepts of human dignity and natural law that would influence Western civilization for millennia. The prophecies of decline. Even in the midst of perfect abundance and harmony, the wise teachers of Saturn's Golden Age understood that their blessed condition was not destined to last forever. The same cosmic principles that had brought about their paradise also decreed that the great wheel of time must turn, bringing ages of increasing difficulty and struggle before the cycle could complete itself and return to golden perfection. Saturn himself, with his divine knowledge of temporal cycles and cosmic necessity, served as the primary source of prophetic understanding about the future that awaited humanity after his departure. These prophecies were not cruel revelations designed to diminish present happiness, but wise warnings that would help future generations understand their trials and maintain hope for eventual restoration. The prophetic tradition that developed during the Golden Age described the coming decline not as arbitrary punishment, but as a necessary stage in cosmic development, a period of testing and purification that would ultimately strengthen humanity and prepare them for an even more perfect Golden Age to come. This understanding provided a framework for interpreting future suffering that emphasized purpose and meaning rather than despair and futility. The first stage of decline would begin, the prophecies taught, when Saturn's direct presence was withdrawn from the Earth and humanity was left to maintain Golden Age principles through their own understanding and effort. This Silver Age would retain much of the abundance and harmony of the Golden Period, but would require more conscious effort to sustain, marking the beginning of the separation between divine and human wisdom. During the Silver Age, the prophets explained, the automatic abundance that characterized Saturn's reign would gradually diminish, requiring humans to work more actively to meet their needs while still maintaining the cooperative and generous spirit that had made Golden Age society possible. This period would test humanity's commitment to their highest ideals when external conditions no longer made virtue effortless. The Bronze Age that would follow would bring increasing scarcity and conflict as humanity gradually forgot the wisdom of their golden ancestors and began to organize society around competition rather than cooperation. War would be invented during this period, along with the concepts of private property and social hierarchy that would create lasting divisions between different groups of humans. The Iron Age that would conclude the cycle would represent the nadir of human civilization, a time when strength would replace wisdom as the basis for authority, when scarcity would be accepted as natural rather than understood as a temporary aberration, and when the memory of Golden Age perfection would survive only in myths and legends that most people would dismiss as impossible fantasies. Yet even these dark prophecies contained seeds of hope, for the wise teachers of Saturn's time understood that the cosmic wheel must eventually complete its rotation and return to its starting point. The Iron Age would not last forever, but would eventually give way to a new Golden Age that would surpass even the perfection of Saturn's reign, informed by the wisdom gained through experiencing the full cycle of cosmic development. The prophecies also revealed that certain locations and lineages would retain fragments of Golden Age wisdom throughout the darkest periods, serving as hidden preservers of ancient knowledge that would provide the foundation for eventual restoration. These chosen carriers of sacred tradition would maintain the practices and understanding necessary to recognize and welcome the return of Golden Age conditions when the cosmic cycle reached its appointed time. The Great Departure. The time of Saturn's departure from the Earth marked the end of the Golden Age proper and the beginning of the long cycle of decline that would characterize human history until the prophesied return of divine abundance. This transition was not sudden or unexpected but gradual and carefully prepared, allowing humanity to adapt slowly to their new responsibilities while retaining as much Golden Age wisdom as possible. The signs of approaching change had been visible for some time to those who understood the cosmic principles that govern temporal cycles. The miraculous abundance that had characterized the peak of the Golden Age began to moderate slightly, requiring more human effort to maintain while still providing far more than basic necessities. The perfect harmony between human desires and natural provision started to show occasional discordances that required wisdom and patience to resolve. Saturn himself began to speak more frequently about the cosmic necessity of change and the importance of preserving Golden Age principles through the coming transitions. His teachings during this period focused on practical wisdom that would help his people maintain their values and social arrangements even when external conditions no longer made virtue effortless. The god established various institutions and traditions specifically designed to survive his departure and provide continuity with Golden Age ideals throughout the coming ages. These included sacred festivals that would recreate Golden Age conditions periodically, educational systems that would preserve essential knowledge, and legal principles that would guide governance when divine wisdom was no longer directly available. The most important of these preserving institutions was the establishment of a priesthood specifically dedicated to maintaining connection with Saturn's continuing influence and ensuring that his teachings would be accurately transmitted to future generations. These priests were not intermediaries between humanity and the divine but guardians of wisdom, whose function was to help people understand and apply Golden Age principles under changing conditions. The rituals and ceremonies developed during this transitional period were designed to maintain spiritual connection with cosmic harmony, while also providing practical guidance for organizing society according to divine principles. These practices would later influence Roman religious traditions, though their original meanings would often be obscured or forgotten as memories of the Golden Age faded. Saturn's final appearances among his people were occasions of profound teaching and blessing, as the god shared the deepest insights of divine wisdom and provided encouragement for the challenges that lay ahead. He reminded them that his physical departure did not mean abandonment but transformation, as his influence would continue through the principles he had established and the wisdom he had shared. The actual moment of departure was both sorrowful and hopeful, as the assembled people experienced the loss of direct divine presence while also understanding that they carried within themselves the capacity to maintain Golden Age values and work toward the eventual restoration of paradise. Saturn's final blessing transformed this potential into active power, ensuring that future generations would possess the inner resources necessary for their cosmic mission. The immediate aftermath of Saturn's departure saw the beginning of the Silver Age, a period that retained much of the abundance and harmony of the Golden Time while requiring more conscious effort to maintain. The people who had lived under Saturn's direct rule became teachers and leaders for later generations, sharing their experiences and wisdom to help humanity adapt to their new condition. The institutions that Saturn had established continued to function effectively for many generations, preserving essential knowledge and maintaining social practices that reflected Golden Age principles. The festivals of abundance continued to recreate perfect conditions periodically, while the educational systems ensured that each new generation understood their heritage and their responsibilities. However, the gradual nature of cosmic change meant that each generation inherited slightly less abundance and slightly more challenge than their predecessors, creating a slow but inexorable drift away from Golden Age perfection. The memory of paradise remained vivid for centuries, but the practical ability to maintain its conditions gradually diminished as humanity adapted to scarcity and conflict. The seeds of Rome's greatness. The transition from Saturn's Golden Age to the historical period of Roman civilization represented not simply decline and loss, but also the planting of seeds that would eventually bloom into one of history's greatest achievements in law, governance, and cultural development. The principles and institutions established during the Golden Age would provide the foundation for Roman greatness, even when their original meanings were partially forgotten. The legal concepts developed under Saturn's rule became the basis for Roman jurisprudence, which would eventually influence legal systems throughout the Western world. The Golden Age understanding that true law derives from wisdom rather than force, and that justice must serve the common good rather than private interest, would inspire Roman legal scholars to create systems of remarkable sophistication and fairness. The 12 Tables, Rome's first written law code, reflected Golden Age principles in their emphasis on equality before the law and protection for the weak against the powerful. Though these early laws were far cruder than the perfect justice of Saturn's reign, they represented humanity's best attempt to codify the principles of fairness and universal care that had governed the Golden Age. The development of Roman civil law continued this tradition, creating legal concepts that would influence Western jurisprudence for millennia. The ideas of natural law, universal human rights, and the principle that legitimate authority must serve the common good all trace their origins back to the wisdom preserved from Saturn's Golden Age. The political philosophy of the Golden Age, which demonstrated how authority could be exercised without coercion and how individual freedom could coexist with social order, would influence the development of Roman republican institutions. Though these later political arrangements would never achieve the perfection of Saturn's reign, They would represent humanity's best efforts to recreate Golden Age governance under less favorable conditions. The Roman Senate, in its idealized form, reflected the Golden Age principle of governance through collective wisdom rather than individual power. The concept of checks and balances, the rotation of offices, and the ideal of public service over personal gain all echoed the political arrangements that had characterized Saturn's perfect society. The Roman concept of citizenship itself was revolutionary for its time, extending legal protections and political participation to previously excluded groups. This gradual expansion of civic inclusion reflected the Golden Age understanding that all human beings possessed inherent dignity and potential for contribution to the common good. The economic principles of abundance and reciprocal generosity would inspire Roman concepts of civic duty and public service, creating expectations that wealthy citizens should contribute to the common welfare and that governmental authority should be used to promote general prosperity rather than private enrichment. These ideals would help Rome achieve levels of prosperity and cultural development that surpassed all previous civilizations. The Roman practice of public works, the construction of roads, aqueducts, theaters, and baths for the benefit of all citizens, reflected the Golden Age principle that abundance should be shared rather than hoarded. The concept of bread and circuses, while often criticized by later historians, represented an attempt to ensure that basic needs were met and that the benefits of civilization were available to all. The educational traditions established during the Golden Age would influence Roman approaches to learning and cultural development, emphasizing the integration of practical skills with moral wisdom and the importance of developing complete human beings rather than narrow specialists. This educational philosophy would help create the broad cultural synthesis that characterized Roman civilization at its height. Roman rhetorical education, with its emphasis on virtue as well as eloquence, reflected Golden Age understanding that true learning must develop character alongside intellect. The Roman ideal of the orator as a good person speaking well echoed Saturn's teaching that wisdom and virtue were inseparable. Perhaps most importantly, the memory of Golden Age perfection would inspire Roman poets, philosophers, and political leaders to envision and work toward higher possibilities for human civilization. The knowledge that paradise had once existed and could exist again would drive Roman achievements in law, literature, architecture, and governance that would provide models and inspiration for centuries to come. Virgil's Aeneid explicitly connected Roman destiny to the promise of returning Golden Age conditions, prophesying that Augustus would restore the Age of Gold to Latium. This connection between Roman imperial mission and cosmic renewal provided ideological foundation for Roman expansion while also maintaining hope for eventual restoration of paradise. The festival traditions that preserved Golden Age practices would evolve into Roman religious celebrations that maintained connection with cosmic harmony and divine blessing, while also reinforcing social bonds and cultural values. These festivals would help sustain Roman civilization through its darkest periods while also providing glimpses of the higher possibilities that cosmic cycles would eventually restore. The Saturnalia, Rome's most beloved festival, directly commemorated Saturn's Golden Age and temporarily restored its social arrangements. During this celebration, normal hierarchies were suspended, slaves were served by masters, and the abundance and equality of the Golden Age were briefly recreated. This festival served both as remembrance of what had been and as promise of what would come again. The architectural and artistic traditions developed during Saturn's reign would influence Roman aesthetic sensibilities, creating preferences for harmony, proportion, and functional beauty that would characterize Roman buildings, sculptures, and decorative arts. The Golden Age integration of aesthetic and practical considerations would help Romans create a built environment that supported both individual fulfillment and social cohesion. Roman engineering achievements, the Pantheon, the Colosseum, the vast network of roads and aqueducts, reflected Golden Age principles in their combination of beauty, functionality, and service to the common good. These monuments demonstrated that human achievement could serve both practical and spiritual purposes, creating works that inspired awe while also improving daily life. The agricultural techniques and land management practices developed under Saturn's guidance would provide the foundation for Roman farming methods that would support urban populations of unprecedented size while also maintaining soil fertility and environmental balance. The Golden Age understanding of humanity's partnership with nature would influence Roman approaches to engineering and resource management. Most significantly, the Roman concept of universal law and citizenship that would eventually extend throughout their empire reflected the Golden Age understanding that all human beings possessed inherent dignity and potential for development. This universalist vision, though imperfectly implemented, would represent humanity's first serious attempt to create international institutions based on Golden Age principles of equality and mutual respect. The eternal return. The prophetic wisdom preserved from Saturn's Golden Age taught that the cosmic cycles which had brought about paradise once would inevitably bring it about again, creating hope and purpose that would sustain humanity through even the darkest periods of decline. This doctrine of eternal return provided not just comfort for present suffering but practical guidance for working toward the restoration of divine abundance and harmony. The philosophical understanding of cyclical time that had been developed during the Golden Age would later influence Roman concepts of history and destiny, creating expectations that Rome itself was destined to play a crucial role in preparing for the eventual return of perfect conditions. This sense of cosmic mission would drive Roman expansion and cultural development while also moderating imperial ambitions with awareness of ultimate divine purposes. The Stoic philosophers who would later influence Roman thought drew heavily upon Golden Age wisdom in their understanding of cosmic cycles and the role of virtue in maintaining harmony with divine will. Their teaching that the universe periodically returned to its original perfection reflected the prophetic traditions preserved from Saturn's time. The preserved knowledge of Golden Age principles would provide Romans with criteria for evaluating their own institutions and practices, helping them distinguish between developments that moved toward cosmic harmony and those that represented departure from divine wisdom. This critical perspective would enable Roman civilization to achieve unprecedented levels of sophistication while also maintaining awareness of higher possibilities. Roman historians like Livy and Tacitus often measured their contemporary society against the standards of the Golden Age, using this comparison to identify moral decline and call for return to ancient virtues. This historical consciousness helped maintain awareness that current conditions were not the ultimate possibility for human civilization. The memory of Saturn's reign would inspire Roman poets and historians to preserve accounts of the Golden Age that would keep alive the vision of human potential throughout subsequent centuries. These literary works would ensure that the hope of restoration remained alive even during the darkest periods of decline, providing motivation for continued efforts toward justice, beauty, and truth. Ovid's Metamorphoses preserved detailed accounts of the Golden Age that would influence Western literature for centuries, while Virgil's Eclogues prophesied its return under Roman rule. These poetic visions maintained cultural memory of paradise while also connecting it to contemporary political hopes and aspirations. The festival traditions that recreated Golden Age conditions would continue to provide Romans with direct experience of abundance and harmony, reminding them of what had been possible and what would be possible again when cosmic conditions permitted. These celebrations would serve as training grounds for the social practices and spiritual attitudes that would be necessary when paradise returned. The Saturnalia and other festivals derived from Golden Age traditions created temporary communities where Golden Age values could be practiced and experienced. These celebrations maintained practical knowledge of how abundance could be shared and how social harmony could be achieved when proper principles were followed. Perhaps most importantly, the Golden Age understanding of human nature and potential would continue to influence Roman education and character development, ensuring that future generations would possess the inner resources necessary to recognize and welcome the return of divine abundance when the cosmic wheel completed its rotation. The Roman educational emphasis on virtue, service, and excellence reflected Golden Age understanding that human beings were capable of divine-like achievement when properly developed. This anthropological optimism would inspire Romans to attempt great works and maintain high standards even during periods of decline and difficulty. The legacy of Saturn's Golden Age would thus extend far beyond the immediate benefits it provided to those who experienced it directly, creating a permanent foundation for human hope and aspiration that would survive through all the ages of decline and struggle. The memory of paradise would become a guiding star for all subsequent efforts to create justice, beauty, and harmony in human affairs. Christian writers would later interpret Roman achievements as preparation for an even greater restoration, connecting the promise of Saturn's return to their own vision of divine kingdom. This synthesis would ensure that Golden Age wisdom continued to influence Western civilization long after the fall of Rome itself. The continuing influence. The wisdom and principles established during Saturn's Golden Age continued to shape human civilization long after the god's departure and the decline of the perfect society he had created. The seeds planted during that blessed period would sprout and flourish in different forms throughout history, providing inspiration and guidance for those who sought to create better conditions for human flourishing. The legal traditions that emerged from Golden Age principles would influence not only Roman law but also the development of international law and human rights concepts that would eventually span the globe. The understanding that legitimate authority must serve the common good and that all human beings possess inherent dignity would inspire legal reforms and social movements throughout the centuries. The medieval concept of natural law, developed by Christian philosophers building upon Roman legal traditions, directly reflected Golden Age understanding that true law derives from divine wisdom rather than human power. This tradition would eventually influence the development of constitutional government and the recognition of universal human rights. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical texts preserved from the Golden Age would inspire renewed interest in the possibilities for human achievement and social perfection. Humanist philosophers would draw upon accounts of Saturn's reign to envision utopian societies that could recreate Golden Age conditions through proper education and governance. The artistic achievements of the Renaissance, with their emphasis on harmony, proportion, and the integration of beauty with function, reflected Golden Age aesthetic principles preserved through Roman cultural transmission. The great works of Renaissance art and architecture demonstrated that human creativity could serve both spiritual and practical purposes. The Enlightenment philosophers who would later influence the American and French revolutions drew heavily upon Roman interpretations of Golden Age political philosophy in their concepts of natural rights, popular sovereignty, and the social contract. The idea that government exists to serve the people rather than the reverse traced its origins back to Saturn's perfect rule. The American founding fathers, particularly Thomas Jefferson, explicitly connected their revolutionary ideals to classical concepts derived from the Golden Age tradition. The Declaration of Independence's assertion that all men are created equal reflected Golden Age understanding of universal human dignity and potential. Modern movements for social justice, environmental protection, and international cooperation continue to draw inspiration from the vision of harmony and abundance that characterized Saturn's reign. The understanding that scarcity and conflict are not natural conditions but temporary aberrations provides hope and motivation for those working toward better conditions for all humanity. The environmental movement's emphasis on humanity's partnership with nature rather than domination over it reflects Golden Age wisdom about the proper relationship between human beings and the Earth. The concept of sustainable development represents an attempt to recreate the harmony between human needs and natural abundance that characterized Saturn's time. Contemporary discussions of universal basic income, cooperative economics, and post-scarcity societies echo Golden Age principles about the distribution of abundance and the organization of labor. These modern concepts represent attempts to use technology and social innovation to recreate the security and freedom that characterized life under Saturn's rule. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Saturn's Golden Age and its lasting influence on human civilization. If you've enjoyed this exploration of Roman mythology and its profound insights into human nature and social possibility, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with others who might appreciate these ancient stories of wisdom and hope. The Golden Age may belong to the distant past, but its principles and vision continue to inspire those who seek to create better conditions for human flourishing. The memory of Saturn's perfect reign reminds us that abundance and harmony are not impossible dreams but achievable realities, when wisdom guides human action and divine principles inform social organization. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with visions of the abundance and peace that once blessed the earth and will bless it again when humanity learns to live in harmony with cosmic wisdom. Until next time, this is your guide through the realms of myth and meaning, wishing you the courage to work toward the restoration of paradise and the wisdom to recognize its seeds in every act of justice and generosity. The Golden Age awaits not just in some distant future, but in every moment when we choose cooperation over competition, wisdom over force, and love over fear. In these choices, we honor Saturn's memory and prepare the way for the eventual return of divine abundance to our troubled world. May the principles that govern that perfect time continue to guide and inspire us as we work toward creating a world worthy of the Golden Age that once was and will be again.